So this study aims at investigating the introduction of artificial intelligence inside El Jazeera newsroom. So this study is based on a semi-structured interviews, mainly with El Jazeera Research and Development Department, El Jazeera Artificial Intelligence News Lab, also AI operation managers, as well as some of the AI developers who does not work inside Al Jazeera newsroom, but however, they are part of a collaboration between Al Jazeera and the Qatar Research Computer Center. Let me first talk about artificial intelligence in newsroom in the Arab world. Artificial intelligence in the Arab world is not a sort of like is still in its infantile process. So it's still on its sort of like it's starting. So there's only sort of like a handful of organizations who are working with AI inside newsrooms, and mainly they are working with automation. One of the main reasons why artificial intelligence became part of Arab World Newsroom is actually, is this seen as a tool to control fake news in that sense. So it was not seen first as a tool to help journalists or to assist journalists in making news or making better journalism, but mainly as a tool to combat fake news. This was mainly developed after the Arab Spring. Now, 10 years after the Arab Spring, fake news started to develop and develop clearly after the Arab Spring. So although several researchers deal with fake news and the importance of fake news and the birth of fake news after the 2016 elections, but one can really see the effect of fake news on Arab politics, mainstream politics, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. So mainly, if we take an example of Egypt, for example, after the 2011 revolution, the Egyptian network sphere, in that sense, there were several political players. So you have the extremists, the liberal, the officials, the religious, the military, young women, elite, civil society, diaspora, businesses, and so on. And social media became a form of a political playground for propaganda news. And later on, it became part of a production for fake news. It was seen as a tool for the current regime in Egypt to seize power. It was seen as a tool in the disintegration of Sudan into Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan. Also, it was seen as a tool to the rise of some political parties, especially Muslim Brotherhood parties like Ennahda in Tunisia, and later on to the fall of Ennahda political party in Tunisia. And looking at that, there were several tools for fake news production that range from fake accounts, from using bots, from using digital army, sort of like electronic flies, also hiring fake news makers like in Ukraine, like in United Arab Emirates, and so on. So where does journalism industry stands for? So unfortunately, newspaper industry, they became a tool to propagate this form of fake news. And once they understood that they are being part of this manipulative machine, they started to develop teams to verify news, depend on websites that are dedicated to combat fake news. But in that sense, the effect of the spread of fake news was higher. So that is why we saw a form of a crisis, of identity crisis for the journalism industry. And that is why they started to invest in using artificial intelligence. One of the leading organizations that started using AI in news businesses was Al Jazeera. And the story for Al Jazeera using AI is also of interest, because Al Jazeera is more than a news organization. It is seen as a form of a political party. in that sense. It has like more than 50 million followers in the Arab world, and you can see that it has a lot of power. It became sort of like one of the main tools for news making as well as for disseminating news and information. So it's seen more of a political army. It played definitely a role during the Arab Spring as well as in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And also, of course, it became a tool for Qatar in order to propagate its politics. Looking at AI inside the newsroom, it is based on several teams. To be exact, there are 9 teams of AI, and these 9 teams, they represent the 9 platforms of production of news in Jazeera. So you have it for a Jazeera web, you have an AI team for Jazeera website, for Jazeera television, for Jazeera Mubashir, for Jazeera International, for AG+, as well as for different platforms on social media, for Facebook, for Instagram, and so on. And this is also sort of like managed by a central AI news lab, and which is working in collaboration with different organizations inside Qatar, like Qatar Foundation, as well as the University in Qatar, as well as the Qatar Computing Research Institute. Also, they are working with international platforms or global platforms like Google, Facebook Initiative. Also, they are working with with industries like AFP, Guardian, New York Times, Washington Post. Also, they are working with a project called Project Origin, as far as I understand, with the BBC. And underneath this sort of like central AI team, there are also sub-teams that includes both technicals and journalists who work in terms of producing programs as well as managing ready-made programs for news dissemination. So let me now talk a little bit about some results from the interviews. So Al Jazeera is using a combination of tools that are ready-made from the internet, especially when it comes to checking facts like PolitiFacts, like 10B. And these programs are available in order to check the sources and check whether the information is real or not. They have created also their own platform in terms of giving scores for different platforms as well as for different sources of information, which is called 10B. Also, Al Jazeera has been using artificial intelligence for quality assurance to make sure that, to look into evaluating the news content, to make sure that they have a diversity of opinion, mainly because Al Jazeera has been recently under attack that they are propagating for a certain propaganda, for a certain line. So they created this sort of like unit of quality assurance, looking at the inclusion and exclusion of voices using artificial intelligence, looking at the diversity of sources, looking at the diversity of information, the diversity of actors, presenters, as well as the content, the topics that they are presenting on the different platforms. Artificial intelligence also is used in terms of profiling not only the news programs, but profiling the experts that they are that serve as guests in terms of creating databases. One recent project that deals also with profiling is profiling officials. So and this is helping Al Jazeera network, especially Al Jazeera correspondences. So for example, if Al Jazeera correspondent is working in the White House and you have Joe Biden or a member from the White House is giving a speech, so this specific person is part of Al Jazeera database. And they are using AI in terms of capturing the text or capturing the conversation, and it creates a form of an immediate fact check with previous discussions, with previous stands, and this gives room for the journalist in order to develop better questions, better interaction, looking at development of news, and so on. Another interesting project that Al Jazeera is working with is profiling Al Jazeera users. And this is used in two levels. First level in terms of customization of news for Al Jazeera users, but also creating a form of a list of users who are members of a certain sort of like political affiliation, or in that sense, members of a specific line that would attack Al Jazeera in that sense, and sometimes, or that they would use Al Jazeera content in order to create fake news. And at certain points, they would be seen as a form of like an intervention, like, okay, this user has been proven of spreading fake news or using Al Jazeera content in terms of giving information, giving false information. So, and this is using network analysis. Finally, I will spend 1 or 2 minutes now on looking on other future programs. One of the main future programs that Al Jazeera is using is anticipation, and this uses both artificial intelligence as well as editors. So it's a form of human communication interaction where they are looking, or like where it's sort of like surveys media content from Al Jazeera and from other organizations and see, like, for example, where is the next hotspot, so that Al Jazeera can invest in resources, understand what type of events that can take place. Finally, it is used. One of the sort of like new projects is building a database in terms of understanding both text as well as videos that is providing. Some of the main issues, and this is my concluding remark, some of the main issues that Al Jazeera is using is that artificial intelligence is becoming now bigger and bigger, and this requires more resources. Even with this size of an organization of Al Jazeera, it seemed to be like very demanding in terms of economy. Also, like the previous presentation has pointed out, there is what would be called the industry technical anticipation and the journalistic anticipation, and whether the technology should be deterministic in that sense or a form of a collaboration between the journalists and the industry. Also, there is a problem of the journalistic capacity and the fear of the journalists that the AI at one point will replace their journalism. Finally, there is the problem of Arabization, especially when it comes to dialect and dialect detection with the presence of at least 8 or 9 dialects that are part of the Arab language. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.